the hypogeum of Halsaflieni. The year is 1902. A construction crew on the small Mediterranean island of Malta is drilling foundations for a new housing block in the town of Paola. The drill breaks through solid limestone and falls into nothing. A worker leans in with a torch. Below him, carved from the living rock, are chambers descending 12 meters into the earth. The walls are smooth. The ceilings are painted red. And scattered across the floor in every room are the bones of 7,000 human beings. This is the hypogeum of Halsaflieni, a 3-level underground sanctuary built somewhere between 3600 and 2500 BCE. It predates Stonehenge by 1,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by at least 500. The people who carved it used stone and antler tools. They had no metal. And yet what they built underground is not a cave. It is a machine. The structure covers roughly 500 square meters across 3 descending levels, all hand-carved from coralline limestone with a precision that still baffles structural engineers today. The upper level contains cisterns and storage chambers. The middle level holds a painted hall, a series of oval rooms, and a small carved niche in the wall called the oracle room. The lowest level descends into flooded darkness and has never been fully explored. The oracle room is where it gets impossible. When a male voice speaks inside that small carved niche at a resonant frequency of approximately 110 Hz, the sound does not echo. It expands. It fills every chamber in the entire structure simultaneously. The walls vibrate. The bones of the place hum, but only at that one frequency. A woman's voice, pitched higher, produces nothing. Acoustic researchers Aaron Watson and David Keating studied the phenomenon and confirmed it. This is not a random quirk of cave geometry. The shape of that niche was carved and refined until it isolated a specific frequency. Someone listened, chipped stone away, listened again, adjusted, and repeated that process until they got exactly what they wanted. Here is what makes that terrifying. 110 Hz is the frequency at which modern neuroscience has found the human brain temporarily suppresses activity in the left prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational, linear thinking. At that frequency, the brain shifts into something older, something more receptive. You don't think, you receive. Whoever built the oracle room knew this, not through anatomy textbooks, not through neuroscience, but through some form of knowledge we cannot account for. They knew what sound could do to a mind. And they carved a room that could do it to 20,000 people's worth of bones. Because those 7,000 dead were not randomly deposited here. Analysis of the remains suggests accumulation over roughly 1,000 years of active use. Certain chambers appear to have received specific types of burial. The sleeping woman, a limestone figurine about 12 centimeters long, depicting a reclining figure with heavy, rounded proportions, was found inside. She is not sleeping casually. She is in the posture of incubation, the ancient practice of entering a sacred space to receive divine vision through dreams. The figure suggests that people came here not just to bury their dead, but to lie down in the dark and wait for something to speak to them. The site was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. It was closed to the public from 1992 to 2000 because human breath and body heat were dissolving the painted ceilings. Today it allows just 80 visitors per day under strict climate controls. The painted ceiling of the decorated chamber, covered in spirals and ochre geometry that UNESCO called among the finest Neolithic art in the world, is slowly losing its color regardless. Archaeologists classify the hypogeum as an ossuary, a communal tomb with ritual functions consistent with Mediterranean Neolithic traditions of Earth Mother worship. The acoustic properties are remarkable. but possibly accidental. Hemispherical chambers in hard stone can naturally focus sound. The sleeping figure fits a documented pattern of goddess figurines found across Malta and Gozo. It is a sacred burial site, that is the official position. But here is what that position does not address. Accidental acoustics do not produce a single isolated frequency. They produce reverb. They produce echo. They produce the chaotic bounce of sound in an enclosed space. The oracle room does not do that. It does something targeted and specific. And the question that stays with you after you learn about it is this: if a civilization with stone tools and antler picks could engineer a room that altered human consciousness through sound alone, what else did they know that we have not yet found? The deepest level of the hypogam is still flooded. No one has seen what is down there. From an underground chamber designed to change how the mind works, we move to the other side of the world, where someone carved underground on a scale that makes Malta look like a single room, and then erased every record that it ever happened. The Longyu Caves. In June of 1992, a farmer named Wu Anai decided to drain a pond near his village in Zhejiang province, southeastern China. He had always wondered why it never seemed to have a bottom. He pumped water out for 17 days straight. When the level finally dropped, he did not find a pond floor. He found a stone entrance, carved and deliberate, descending into darkness. He went in. The cave was enormous. The walls were covered in a perfectly uniform pattern of parallel chisel marks, angled at 60 degrees, running from floor to ceiling like wallpaper applied by a machine. The ceiling soared 10 stories above his head. Wu Anai told his neighbors. They began draining the other ponds. There were 24 of them. Everyone concealed a cave. The Longyu Caves of Cheyenne Baekun are a series of enormous artificial chambers excavated from solid siltstone. The 5 that have been fully drained and studied each reach heights of approximately 30 meters, with ceiling spans of up to 49 meters across. The combined floor area of the explored caves covers roughly 30,000 square meters, the equivalent of 4 full-size football pitches, all carved by hand. The estimated volume of rock removed to create them runs to approximately 1 million cubic meters. And in over 2,000 years of meticulous, obsessive, unbroken Chinese historical record-keeping, the most comprehensive archival tradition in the ancient world, there is not a single character, not one document, not one oracle bone inscription, not one imperial record that mentions their construction, their use, or their existence. That silence is the first impossibility. The second is the chisel pattern. Every surface inside every cave, the walls, the ceilings, the columns left standing for structural support, bears the same parallel lines at the same 60-degree angle with the same consistent spacing. The pattern does not vary between caves. It does not vary between worker shifts or between different sections of the same wall. It is identical throughout, as if applied by a single instrument following a single plan, maintained without deviation across what geologist Liu Siyu and his research team estimated would have required years of continuous labor by a large, highly organized workforce. The third impossibility is the missing stone. When you excavate 1 million cubic meters of rock, that rock has to go somewhere. It produces a spoil heap. Archaeological sites of far smaller scale leave debris fields that are still visible and measurable today. No spoil heap has ever been identified anywhere near Xi'an Baekun. No ancient quarry waste. No secondary deposits of worked siltstone in the surrounding landscape. The rock that was removed from the Longyu Caves has simply never been found. The fourth impossibility is the light. The caves contain no soot on their ceilings. Fire produces soot. Every torchlit ancient space ever excavated carries the black residue of flame on its highest surfaces. The Long-U ceilings are clean. This means the caves were either carved in total darkness or carved using a light source that produced no smoke. In 200 BCE, no such light source existed in the known world. The mainstream position, held somewhat tentatively by Chinese archaeologists, is that these were quarries excavated during the Qin or Han dynasties for building material, and that their records were lost during the chaos of repeated dynastic collapse. The uniform chisel pattern is attributed to a guild working method, a team technique that produced consistent marks. It is a reasonable hypothesis for a civilization that left records of everything else it ever built. But quarries are not architecturally composed. You do not leave structural columns in a quarry for stability. You do not create graduated ramp systems or interconnecting passages that serve no extractive function. And Chinese quarry records from every other known site have survived. An operation requiring this many workers, this many years, and this much imperial-level organization would have left paperwork. Dynasties fell. The paperwork survived everything else. Here, there is nothing. Some researchers have asked a different question entirely. What if the absence of records is not an accident, but a decision? What if the caves were a deliberate state secret, their documentation systematically destroyed? And if so, what was inside them that required that level of concealment? 19 of the 24 caves remain flooded. No systematic authorization has been given to drain and study them. For a discovery of this scale, in a country that treats its archaeological heritage as a matter of national identity, that hesitation is its own kind of message. The stones were removed, the records were removed, and most of the caves are still full of water. Whatever answer lies at the bottom of them, it has been waiting since before the first emperor of China was born. From 1 million cubic meters of carved silence in China, we cross 2 continents to a city, a complete underground city built not for stone extraction or ceremony, but for survival. And whoever built it was afraid of something above. Derinkuyu Underground City. In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey was renovating his home. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a room he had never seen. He walked through it and found another, then another, then a staircase going down. He kept going. The staircase led to tunnels. The tunnels led to more levels. He was standing inside a subterranean city that had been sealed for centuries, a fully functioning underground civilization capable of housing 20,000 people, buried so completely beneath the volcanic landscape that the family living directly above it had absolutely no idea it was there. This is Derinkuyu, the deepest and most complex of Cappadocia's underground cities, reaching a confirmed depth of 85 meters across 18 excavated levels. The Turkish Department of Culture opened a portion to the public in 1969. Approximately half of the complex remains closed and is still being mapped. What is down there is not a shelter. It is a city. The 18 levels contain stables with carved stone feeding troughs, wine and oil presses with collection basins still intact, communal kitchens with smoke-blackened ceilings, storage cellars, schools, chapels, arsenals, and wells that tap underground water sources running the full depth of the structure. The ventilation system consists of approximately 52 individual air shafts, some reaching the full 85-meter depth of the city, maintaining breathable air for the entire population. This is not improvised. This is engineered. Someone understood the physics of underground airflow, calculated the shaft diameters and placements necessary to move fresh air through 18 floors of occupied space, and then carved every inch of it by hand from soft volcanic tuff. The doors are the detail that stops you. At each level, Circular stone discs weighing between 200 and 500 kilograms each can be rolled across the passage to seal it completely. They fit their door frames precisely. Each disc has a hole bored through its center through which a bar or spear could be inserted from the inside, locking it in position. They cannot be opened from outside. The city was designed to be sealed from within and held against any force that might come from above. In 2014, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by a team from Nevşehir University identified a previously unknown underground city beneath the modern city of Nevşehir just a few kilometers away. Initial mapping revealed 7 kilometers of tunnels already traced, connected to chambers potentially larger than Derinkuyu. Cappadocia contains at least 200 known underground cities. The full network has never been mapped. Nobody knows how deep it goes or how far the connections between cities extend. The scholarly consensus is that Derinkuyu was built and expanded over many centuries, primarily by early Christian communities seeking refuge from persecution and later from Arab raids in the 7th and 8th centuries CE. The volcanic tuff of Cappadocia is soft enough to carve with bronze tools yet hardens on air exposure, making it structurally ideal. The complex design reflects accumulated engineering knowledge passed down through generations of builders who understood the geology beneath their feet. The circular stone doors are a practical defense solution. This is refuge architecture, nothing more. But the deepest levels have yielded no Christian iconography. The infrastructure, especially the ventilation engineering and the hydraulic systems, implies a builder who understood far more than trial and error construction would produce. And the official explanation answers the question of how, but not the question of why. 20,000 people do not build a city with wineries, schools, and kitchens 18 floors underground and plan to use it seasonally during raids. These are the fixtures of people who were not planning to go back up. They were planning to stay permanently. The oldest Hittite texts from this region describe underground refuge complexes in Anatolia built in response to a catastrophe whose nature is not specified. Some researchers have pointed to this and asked whether Derinkuyu's deepest, oldest layers connect to a fear that predates any recorded human conflict. A fear not of invaders, but of something in the sky. Something that made the surface uninhabitable. The rolling stone doors lock from the inside. Not to keep an enemy out, but to keep 20,000 people in, sealed off from whatever was happening above them, waiting for it to pass. What they were waiting for, the city does not say. The stones are sealed. The deepest levels are closed. And the ground-penetrating radar beneath Nevşehir has found chambers that no one has yet entered. Derinkuyu was built to make a civilization disappear. Our next discovery is something that civilization, or one very like it, buried deliberately before it vanished. A message written in symbols in a pit with a dismembered body that turned out to be the oldest writing ever found on Earth. The Tartaria tablets. In 1961, Romanian archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa was excavating a Neolithic settlement outside the village of Tartaria in Transylvania. He found a shallow pit. Inside it, wrapped together as a deliberate deposit, were 3 small clay tablets covered in incised symbols, a stone bracelet, a figurine, and human bones. The bones had been burned. They had also been cut apart at the joints. The objects had been placed with care. Then the radiocarbon results came back, and what Vlasa thought he was looking at changed completely. The symbols on the Tartaria tablets are strikingly similar to Proto-Cuneiform, the pictographic precursor to Sumerian writing, the system long considered the world's first. For decades, Sumer held that title, with the earliest symbols dated to approximately 3500 to 3200 BCE. The The Tartaria tablets were dated to approximately 5300 BCE. That makes them roughly 1,000 to 2,000 years older than anything from Mesopotamia. If genuine, these are the oldest written symbols ever found on Earth, and they were found not in a great river civilization, not in a palace or a temple, but buried in a pit in Transylvania beside the ritually dismembered remains of a human being. The tablets are small. The largest is approximately 6.2 centimeters in diameter. But between 12 and 15 distinct incised symbols are visible on their surfaces, depending on interpretation, and some of those symbols are near identical to signs cataloged in the Proto-Sumerian inventory. The overlap is not general, it is specific. Particular symbols, particular combinations, appearing in both systems separated by 1,000 years and 2,000 kilometers. 2 of the 3 tablets have holes pierced through them, suggesting they were worn or suspended before being placed in the pit. They were not practice work, they were objects of power. The Vinca culture that produced these tablets was widespread across southeastern Europe from approximately 5700 to 4500 BCE. Vinca symbols have been found at hundreds of sites across the region, suggesting a coherent and consistent symbolic system used across a broad geographic area over many centuries. Scholar Marco Merlini, who led the International Prehistory Institute's extensive study of the tablets in the early 2000s, argued that the Vinca script constitutes an independent symbolic system, fully formed and deliberately structured, that predates and may have influenced later Near Eastern writing traditions. The mainstream position is careful. Most archaeologists classify the Tartaria tablets as symbolic notation rather than true writing in the linguistic sense. They may record ritual information, ownership marks, or ceremonial sequences, but they do not necessarily encode spoken language with grammatical structure. The visual similarity to Sumerian symbols is attributed to independent convergence. 2 cultures, both developing notation systems, may arrive at similar shapes the same way 2 cultures both arrive at triangular roofs. Additionally, some scholars have questioned whether the radiocarbon dating was applied to the tablets themselves, or only to organic material in the surrounding deposit layer, which could introduce a dating error. But the specificity of the overlap is hard to dismiss as geometry. 2 cultures independently developing similar abstract marks is plausible. 2 cultures independently developing the same cluster of specific symbols, including what appears in both systems as a sign for divine or celestial authority, is a different kind of coincidence. And then there is the body. If this is simply notation, a ledger, a record of grain or cattle, why is the oldest potential writing on Earth buried with a ritually destroyed human being, bones cut at the joints, burned and wrapped with the tablets like a gift? What was being bound in that pit? What was the writing for? The Vinca symbolic system disappeared completely around 4500 BCE. No successor script, no evolved form, no descendant tradition. It simply stops. The civilization that produced the most ancient written symbols we have yet found vanished from the archaeological record without passing their knowledge to anyone who survived. What they were writing, what they were sealing in the ground with burned bones and carved clay, we may never know. From 3 tablets buried in the dark in Romania, we now descend into a chamber 500,000 years in the making, sealed beneath a Mexican mountain where the deep earth has been building something that no human civilization could have conceived. The Neka Crystal Caves. In April of 2000, miners drilling deeper into the Neka silver and lead mine in the state of Chihuahua, northern Mexico, broke through a wall of rock 700 meters below the surface and found themselves at the entrance to a chamber that looked like the interior of another planet. The temperature was 58 degrees Celsius. The humidity was 99%. and from every surface, floor, ceiling, and wall grew crystals the size of telegraph poles, some stretching 12 meters from base to tip, glowing translucent white in the beam of their headlamps. The two miners, brothers Juan and Pedro Sanchez, could not stay more than 10 minutes. Without specialized equipment, a human being inside that chamber would die from heat and respiratory failure in approximately 30 minutes. They had just found the largest natural crystals on Earth. The crystals are selenite, a form of crystallized gypsum, and they grew to their extraordinary size through a process of almost improbable precision. Spanish geologist Juan Manuel Garcia Ruiz of the National Research Council, who led the scientific study of the caves and published his findings in the journal Geology in 2007, determined that the crystals formed in mineral supersaturated water at a temperature of exactly 58 degrees Celsius. At that specific temperature, the gypsum dissolved in the water reaches a precise chemical tipping point. Below it, crystals grow. Above it, they dissolve. The magma system beneath the Naka mountain maintained that exact temperature within a margin of less than 1 degree for an estimated 500,000 years. That stability produced the largest crystals ever found on Earth. The single largest measured specimen is 12.2 meters long, 4 meters wide, and weighs approximately 55 metric tons. 500,000 years. The crystals began growing before our species existed, before Neanderthals painted their first cave wall, before the last ice age, before every civilization we have ever found. They grew in total darkness, in water too hot to touch, inside a mountain that gave no external sign of what it contained, and they would have kept growing for another 500,000 years if a mining drill had not accidentally found them. The deeper implications of what Garcia Ruiz's team found are even harder to absorb. Fluid inclusions, tiny pockets of ancient water sealed inside the mineral lattice of the crystals themselves, were found to contain dormant microorganisms. In 2017, NASA astrobiologist Penelope Boston and her team announced that they had revived some of these organisms in laboratory conditions. The creatures were approximately 50,000 years old. They had been sealed inside solid crystal for 50 millennia, metabolically suspended, waiting. When the conditions were restored, they woke up. The mine's water pumps, which kept the cave system accessible and prevented it from reflooding, were shut down in 2015 when the mining company suspended operations. The caves are now refilling naturally. Within decades, the crystals will be submerged again. The chamber will reseal. The temperature will restabilize, and whatever remains of those ancient organisms will return to their crystal prisons and wait again, in the dark, for however long it takes. Geologists are clear that this is a purely natural phenomenon. Cappadocian geology in Mexico, a volcanic system, saturated groundwater, a specific thermal equilibrium, and enough uninterrupted time. Nothing about it requires human involvement or defies known physics. It is just chemistry and heat running for longer than our minds can comfortably hold. But here is what the Naka caves actually reveal, stripped of the word natural. They reveal that the deep earth has been running its own processes, its own timelines, its own biology, completely parallel to everything that has happened on the surface for periods of time that make all of human history look like an afterthought. There are almost certainly more sealed chambers like this beneath our feet. We will never find most of them. We cannot survive in the ones we do find, and in at least one of them, something was alive long before we arrived, and will be alive again long after we are gone. From crystals that grew for 500,000 years in a sealed room, we now move to something that was sealed deliberately. Not by geology, but by the people who built it. The most sophisticated religious complex in human history, constructed before civilization was supposed to exist, and then methodically buried by the same hands that raised it. Göbekli Tepe. Around 8000 BCE, somewhere on a hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey, a group of people stood at the edge of the most remarkable structure on the surface of the earth. They had been building it for roughly 1600 years. Then, for a reason we still cannot determine, they began to fill it in. They brought stone, they brought debris, they brought the tools they had used to build it, and they buried everything. The hilltop became a mound. The mound became a landscape feature. It would remain invisible for 10,000 years. This is Göbekli Tepe. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt identified its true significance in 1994 and spent the rest of his life excavating it until his death in 2014. What he found rewrote the accepted sequence of human civilization. Radiocarbon dating of the oldest layers, designated Layer 3, places construction at 9,600 to 8,200 BCE, making the oldest sections at least 11,600 years old. For context, that is 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, and it was built by hunter-gatherers who had no agriculture, no pottery, no metal tools, and no written language. The site contains at least 20 circular enclosures. Each is built around pairs of massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some reaching 5.5 meters in height and weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are not rough-hewn. They are shaped with precision, and they are covered in bas-relief carvings of animals executed with the kind of artisanal skill that implies generations of specialized craft. Foxes, scorpions, vultures, boars, snakes, and spiders wind across the stone in compositions that are clearly intentional, clearly symbolic, and clearly designed to communicate something specific to whoever stood among them. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D carries an image that researcher Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh analyzed in a 2017 paper. He argued it depicts a catastrophic event in the sky, a specific arrangement of astronomical symbols he cross-referenced with the position of constellations at approximately 10,950 BCE, which aligns with the period of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a proposed comet strike or airburst that some researchers believe triggered a millennium-long climate catastrophe. If Sweatman's reading is correct, the people who built Göbekli Tepe were not just carving animals. They were recording an apocalypse. Analysis of the animal bones found at the site by researcher Oliver Dietrich shows evidence of large-scale feasting events, butchered remains of gazelle, aurochs, and wild boar in quantities suggesting hundreds or thousands of people gathering regularly from across a wide geographic region. Göbekli Tepe was not a local shrine. It was a pilgrimage destination, drawing people from distances that imply it held meaning for an entire culture, or perhaps multiple cultures, across a vast area. And then they buried it. The backfill has been confirmed through excavation to be deliberate, not natural accumulation. The material was brought to the site and deposited in a systematic sequence, mixed with worked flint, animal bones, and small carved figurines, as if each layer of fill was itself a ritual act. Klaus Schmidt, before his death, proposed that the burial was a form of ritual closure, a religious decision to inter the sacred space. It is the most widely accepted explanation. But a ritual closure, visible enough to function as a monument, would have been found. Göbekli Tepe was invisible to every subsequent civilization that occupied this region, including the Byzantines, the Romans, the Assyrians, and the Hittites, all of whom documented the landscape around it extensively. The burial was designed to disappear completely, and with 95% of the site still underground, we have found the edges of something without knowing the shape of what lies at its center. Some researchers ask whether the burial was not closure but preservation. whether the people who built Göbekli Tepe knew that something was coming, something that would destroy them, and chose to protect their most important site the only way they could. They sealed it in the earth and walked away. If that reading is right, then the still unexcavated 95% was not buried to end something. It was buried to survive long enough to be found. On the other side of the world, another civilization built something underground and then sealed the entrances for a different reason entirely. Not to preserve it, to keep people out. And in the cases where people went in anyway, some of them never came back. The Sacsayhuaman tunnels. Sometime in the 1500s, Spanish conquistadors arrived in Cusco and heard a story from the Inca people they had just conquered. Beneath the great fortress of Sacsayhuaman, whose outer walls are constructed from limestone blocks weighing up to 120 tons, fitted without mortar in the same polygonal style found in Malta and Egypt, there existed a network of underground passages called the chincanas, the labyrinth. The passages, the Inca said, stretched for miles beneath the city, connecting the fortress to the Coricancha, the golden temple of the sun, kilometers away. Several Spanish soldiers went in to investigate. One, according to the colonial record, was never seen again. In the 20th century, after multiple modern explorers entered the tunnels and failed to return, the Peruvian government sealed the known entrances. The official reason given was public safety. The chincanas are not a legend in the sense of being unverifiable. They are documented. Garcilaso de la Vega, writing in his Royal Commentaries of the Inca, published in 1609, describes underground corridors wide enough for a man to walk upright, stretching beneath the Inca capital with specific destinations. Pedro Cieza de Leon's Chronicle of Peru, written in 1553, also references the passages, describing their use by priests for ritual movement between the city's sacred sites. These are primary colonial sources written by men who spoke to Inca survivors within a generation of the conquest. They were not recording myth, they were recording testimony. The physical entrances exist. 19th century explorer Ephraim George Squire documented and photographed a visible tunnel entrance near Sacsayhuaman in his 1877 work on Peru, describing a stone-lined passage descending into the hillside. The entrance is still visible today, blocked by modern masonry. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the Cusco area have confirmed subsurface voids of significant scale beneath the zone between Sacsayhuaman and the Coricancha. Those voids have never been excavated. No authorization has been granted to open them. The most documented account of a modern penetration comes from a Cusqueño man named Andrés Quesada, who reportedly entered the tunnels in the early 20th century and emerged days later in the grounds of the Santo Domingo Church, which was built directly atop the ruins of the Coricancha. He was said to be disoriented and was reportedly clutching a gold object. Whether that account is fully reliable is impossible to say at this distance. But it is the account that local tradition has preserved, and it places his emergence point exactly where the colonial sources said the tunnels end. The architecture of Sacsayhuaman itself deepens the mystery. The surface walls are built from the same polygonal, mortar-free stonework found in the ancient sites of the Mediterranean and the Near East, blocks weighing between 28 and 120 tons, cut into irregular interlocking shapes that survive earthquakes that destroy modern concrete buildings. The sections of tunnel wall that have been documented before sealing show the same construction style, suggesting the surface fortress and the underground network were built by the same hands, following the same plan. Peruvian archaeologists largely accept that some form of underground passage system exists beneath Cusco, consistent with Andean traditions of sacred underground space. The colonial documentation is sufficient to establish historical reality. The tunnels served ritual and administrative functions for the Inca priesthood. The government's decision to seal the entrances reflects genuine safety concerns about unstable geology and the risk to unsupported explorers. That is the official framework. But Sacsayhuaman Surface Complex receives millions of visitors annually without being sealed. The entire Inca archaeological zone around Cusco is actively promoted, studied, and internationally funded. The tunnels beneath it have received none of that attention. The gold that the Inca reportedly transported into the Chincanas during the Spanish conquest, described in multiple colonial sources as enough to fill several rooms, was never recovered by the Spanish and has never been located by any subsequent excavation. For a country that has invested enormously in Inca archaeology, the complete absence of any authorized subsurface study of the most historically documented underground network in the Americas is a silence that the official explanation does not account for. Some passages are sealed because they are dangerous. Others are sealed because of what they contain. We may never know which category the Chincanas fall into. The entrances are blocked. The radar anomalies remain unmapped. And somewhere beneath the streets of Cusco, the tunnels are still there, waiting in the dark exactly as they were left. In China, a different kind of underground discovery was made not by explorers, not by radar, but by accident, by a construction worker's drill. And what it broke into was not a tunnel or a city. It was the burial pit of an entirely unknown civilization, the Sangsingdui sacrificial pits. In 1986, construction workers at a brick factory in Guanghan, Sichuan Province, China, struck something hard below the surface. Archaeologists from the Sichuan Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics arrived and began excavating two rectangular pits. What they found inside rearranged our understanding of ancient China. Bronze masks with eyes that protrude horizontally from the face by more than 16 centimeters, as if designed to see in two directions simultaneously. Heads covered in hammered gold foil. A bronze tree nearly 4 meters tall, branching into 9 suns, each bearing a bird. And every single object before being placed in the ground had been deliberately smashed and set on fire. None of it matched anything in the archaeological record. Not in style, not in symbolism, not in the mythology it seemed to encode. This was not the Shang dynasty, the Bronze Age civilization that was supposed to dominate Sichuan at this period. This was something else entirely, an unknown civilization buried in the earth whose existence no one had suspected. The dating of the pits places the burial events at approximately 1250 to 1000 BCE, contemporaneous with the late Shang dynasty. The Shang were the most thoroughly documented Bronze Age civilization in China. They left oracle bone inscriptions, bronze ritual vessels, royal tombs, and administrative records that have been studied for over a century. They had a specific aesthetic, a specific mythology, and a specific symbolic vocabulary. The Sangsingdui artifacts share none of it. The protruding eye masks have no parallel anywhere in the ancient world. The 9-sun bronze tree directly contradicts the mainstream Chinese mythological tradition, which states there were 10 suns. The standing bronze figure discovered in Pit 2, measuring 2.62 meters tall and weighing 180 kilograms, is the largest bronze standing figure from the ancient world, predating comparable Greek bronzes by centuries, and it depicts a being whose identity no scholar has agreed upon. Then between 2019 and 2021, construction work in the same area accidentally revealed 6 additional pits. They are still being excavated. Each new pit contains objects that confirm the pattern and deepen the mystery. A gold mask reportedly weighing approximately 280 grams, large enough to cover a human face completely, was announced by Chinese state media in March of 2021. more bronze figures, more gold foil faces, more smashed, burned, deliberately buried objects of extraordinary craftsmanship, and still no writing, no inscription, no text of any kind. Isotopic analysis of the bronze used at Sangqingdui, conducted by researchers including Jianjun Mei of the Needham Research Institute at Cambridge, found that the copper and tin sources overlap with those used by the Shang dynasty. The two civilizations had access to the same raw materials. They chose to make radically different things with them. That is not geographic isolation. That is ideological separation. These were two civilizations that knew the same Earth and built different worlds from it. The mainstream interpretation, advanced by Chinese archaeologists, identifies the Sangqingdui culture as the ancient Shu Kingdom, a regional Bronze Age civilization in the Sichuan Basin that developed independently of but in loose contact with the Central Plains culture. The ritual destruction and burial of the objects is interpreted as a termination event, a religious practice triggered possibly by flooding near the Min River, by political upheaval, or by a transition in belief systems. The absence of writing is explained by the probable use of perishable materials like bamboo or wood which have not survived. But the Shu Kingdom hypothesis requires a civilization to reach this level of technical sophistication with zero developmental archaeology. There are no early Sangqingdui objects, no prototypes, no primitive precursors. The culture appears in the record fully formed at the apex of its ability and then vanishes, and the ritual termination framework does not explain why objects of this importance were wrapped in silk before destruction, or why the 8 known pits are positioned in a geometric relationship to one another that implies a master plan. 6 of those 8 pits are still being excavated. Whatever they contain is still underground. Whatever this civilization was, whatever they were building and then destroying and then burying, the answer is still down there, and we are still only at the beginning of finding it. In Ecuador, a very different kind of underground mystery was pursued not by archaeologists, but by one of the most famous human beings of the 20th century, a man who had walked on the moon, who descended into a cave in the jungle to look for something that the official record says was never found. The Cueva de los Tallos. On July 21, 1976, Neil Armstrong descended on a rope into a cave system in the Ecuadorian Amazon. It was not a publicity event. It was not a speaking tour. Armstrong, the first human being to walk on the surface of another world, was there because a Hungarian explorer named János Moric had filed a notarized legal document with the Ecuadorian government in 1969 claiming that he had personally found inside this cave a library. Not scrolls, not tablets of stone. Thousands of engraved metal plates stacked in man-made rooms in the deep interior, inscribed with an unknown script that Moric believed belonged to a civilization that predated all others. Armstrong went in. The expedition lasted weeks. The official findings were inconclusive. The metal library was never confirmed. It was also never definitively ruled out. The Cueva de los Tallos is real. A vast and archaeologically significant cave system in the Morona Santiago province of southeastern Ecuador on land belonging to the Shuar people, who regard the deeper sections as spiritually forbidden. The explored passages extend a confirmed minimum of 2.85 kilometers, with an estimated total extent substantially larger. The cave reaches depths of approximately 200 meters and contains chambers up to 90 meters in height. It is not a small cave. It is a subterranean landscape. Armstrong's expedition was organized by Scottish researcher Stan Hall and co-led with the formal participation of the Ecuadorian Army. It included 100 members drawn from British and Ecuadorian scientific institutions and was the largest organized exploration of the cave system ever attempted. Hall continued to investigate the mystery for decades afterward, publishing a book arguing that the expedition's official findings had minimized certain discoveries for reasons of political sensitivity. Morich's 1969 legal declaration described the metal tablets as inscribed with a form of writing that he believed to be the common ancestor of all known ancient scripts. He compared specific symbols to Sumerian, Egyptian, and other ancient sign systems, claiming the visual overlaps were too precise to be coincidental. The existence of his legal declaration is documented. The declaration itself was notarized and filed. Whether what he described exists is another matter entirely. It is worth noting a separate thread in this story. Father Carlos Crespi, a Salesian missionary based in Cuenca, Ecuador, who died in 1982, accumulated over several decades a substantial private collection of metal and stone artifacts brought to him by indigenous people from the region around the Cueva de los Tallos. The collection reportedly included metal objects inscribed with symbols matching Morich's descriptions. After Crespi's death, the Vatican took possession of the collection. Most of the objects are no longer publicly accessible. Requests to study them have reportedly been declined. The Shuar oral tradition describes the cave as the entrance to an underground world inhabited by beings they call by the cave's name. Those beings are not birds. The oil birds that nest in the cave and give it its common name, the Tallos, are real. The beings in the Shuar tradition are something else, described as guardians of knowledge placed underground before the time of human memory. The mainstream assessment of the Cueva de los Tallos is that it is a significant archaeological site with confirmed evidence of pre-Columbian human habitation, but that Morich's metal library claim is most likely a misidentification, a fabrication, or a reference to objects that no longer remain in the cave. The cave's geology and the documented Shuar use of its shallower sections are sufficient to explain the archaeological finds. The absence of the metal library in the expedition's official findings is taken as the most straightforward evidence that it is not there. But the question of why Neil Armstrong personally led this expedition has never been satisfactorily answered. He gave one public statement about his involvement and said nothing further of substance about what he saw underground. Armstrong was a private and precise man. He did not attach his name or his time to things he did not consider significant. Someone in 1976 gave the first man on the moon a reason to spend weeks inside a cave in the Ecuadorian jungle. What that reason was, the official record does not say. Our final discovery is smaller than a cave, smaller than a city, smaller than any of the structures we have visited. It fits in both your hands. It is made of clay. It is between 2,000 and 4,000 years old, and every single one was deliberately smashed and buried underground before anyone could ask what it was. The dog figurines. They are small enough to hold in both hands. They are made of fired clay. They are between 2,000 and 4,000 years old, and they are wearing what appears to be a sealed suit with articulated joints at the knees, elbows, and shoulders, a helmet with a visor-like panel across what should be the face, and large circular eyes behind protrusions that look less like a human eye socket and more like a pair of protective goggles. They were made by the Jomon people, Japan's oldest known culture, hunter-gatherers who had no metal tools and no written language, and every single one of them was deliberately broken before being buried in the ground. The figurines are called dog, and over 18,000 individual specimens and fragments have been cataloged by the Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs and held in collections including the Tokyo National Museum. They are among the most studied artifacts in Japanese archaeology. They are also among the most unexplained. The two central questions, what they represent and why they were always intentionally destroyed before burial, remain genuinely open after more than a century of formal study. The dog tradition spans the Jomon period from approximately 14,000 to 300 BCE, the longest continuous archaeological culture ever identified, longer than all of recorded human history. Earlier, Jomon figurines are flat and abstract. Then, in the late Jomon period, beginning around 1500 BCE, a specific new form appears without developmental precursors. These are the shakoki dog, the goggle-eyed figurines. They are three-dimensional, elaborately decorated, and anatomically unlike any previous Japanese art form. The goggle eye protrusions are not representational of any known human or animal eye. They project outward from the face by 2 to 4 centimeters in some specimens, with a vertical slit in the center consistent with a viewing aperture, not a pupil. The surface decoration on the body follows the limbs in a segmented pattern more consistent with a garment or casing than with tattooing or skin. The joints at the knees, elbows, and shoulders are articulated in the decoration as if the artist was depicting something that moved at those specific points because it was constructed to move there. Japanese archaeologist Okamura Michio analyzed the fracture patterns across a large sample of dog and found that the breaks are not random. They follow consistent anatomical lines, the same joints on figurine after figurine, across widely separated geographic sites and across many centuries. This is a formalized breaking protocol maintained without variation across the entire geographic range of the culture and the entire duration of the tradition. Whatever the ritual was, it was specific, consistent, and disciplined. After breaking, the figurines were not discarded in middens or left on surfaces. They were buried in dedicated underground deposits. At the Kamigaoka site in Aomori Prefecture, a concentration of intentionally fragmented dog was found in a single dedicated pit with no associated human remains. They were not grave goods, they were not garbage. They were interred with the same deliberate care as the dead, placed in the earth as a specific act of deposition. The mainstream interpretation is that dog functioned as ritual substitutes in healing ceremonies. A sick or injured person transferred their illness symbolically to the figurine, which was then broken to destroy the sickness and buried to complete the ritual disposal. The goggle eyes are artistic exaggeration, the intensified seeing of a magical intermediary. The consistent breaking points reflect a shared ritual grammar passed down through the culture. This is the explanation offered by most Japanese archaeologists, and it has the coherence of a functional hypothesis. But a healing proxy ritual leaves a broken fragment, not a comprehensively and consistently smashed figure buried in a dedicated underground pit with no associated individual. If you break a clay doll to cure a headache, you do not then enter the pieces 6 feet down in a cache alongside the broken pieces of other dolls brought from other places by other people. The Kamigaoka deposit implies gathering, a deliberate assembly of broken figures from a wide area, brought together for a collective underground deposition. That is not disposing of ritual waste. That is planting something. The shakoki dogu appear suddenly, fully formed, in the late Jomon period and then disappear completely when the Yomon culture transitions to the yayoi around 300 BCE. The incoming yayoi did not adapt the tradition. They did not simplify it. They stopped it entirely, as if they knew what the figurines were for and decided not to continue. What they understood about those suited, goggle-eyed forms that we do not, the archaeological record does not say. Whatever the dog were, they were important enough to make with great care, specific enough to break in a precise and prescribed way, and sacred enough to bury rather than discard. They were dressed in something. They were protected behind something. And then they were put in the ground where they waited 2,000 years for someone to dig them up and ask what they were supposed to be. 10 holes in the ground, 10 things that came out of them. And every single one of them asked the same question in a different language. How much of what we think we know about the human past is actually true? Look at what connects them, not the geography, which spans Malta to China, Peru to Japan, not the era, which ranges from 500,000 years ago to the Roman period. What connects them is the pattern of concealment. The oracle room is carved deep in the earth and covered with the bones of 7,000 dead. The Longyu caves are flooded and unrecorded. Derinkuyu is sealed with rolling stone doors from the inside. The Tartaria tablets are buried with a dismembered body. The crystal caves are resealing themselves with water as we speak. Gobekli Tepe was buried deliberately by the people who built it. The Sacsayhuaman tunnels are sealed by government order. The Sanjingdui objects were smashed and burned before interment. The Cueva de los Tallos has never been fully mapped. The dog were broken and planted in the ground in dedicated pits. Every single discovery on this list was hidden. Not by time, not by accident, but by intention. The mainstream explanation for each of these, taken individually, is reasonable. Acoustics can be accidental. Records can be lost. Tunnels can be sealed for safety. Objects can be ritually destroyed. None of those explanations are wrong. They are all plausible. What mainstream archaeology struggles with is the pattern when you see all 10 together, the consistent, cross-cultural, multi-millennial compulsion to put the most important things underground and cover them over, as if what was built above required that something remain hidden below. The alternative view, held by a growing number of researchers outside the mainstream consensus, is that these discoveries are not isolated anomalies. They are data points, evidence that the human story is longer, more complex, and more deliberately obscured than the accepted timeline accounts for. That civilizations we have not named built things we cannot fully explain, new things we cannot fully account for, and then, for reasons we cannot fully reconstruct, chose to hide what they had made. The honest answer is that we do not know which of those positions is correct, and that is exactly the point. Because most people walk past these questions entirely. They accept the official explanation, turn the page, and move on. The fact that you are still here means your mind does not stop at the first answer offered to it. You look at the bones in the oracle room and ask why there are 7,000 of them. You hear about the missing spoil rock in China, and you ask where 1,000,000 cubic meters of stone actually went. You read about the sealed tunnels in Cusco, and you notice that they have never been excavated despite being in one of the most archaeologically active regions on Earth. That is not a casual observation. That is a different way of thinking. This channel exists for exactly that way of thinking. Subscribe, join the archive, and go to the comments. Tell me which of these 10 discoveries you think is the hardest to explain away. Not the most dramatic, the hardest to dismiss. Build the case. The floor is yours. Here is what the underground keeps telling us in every century and in every language. The most important things were not left in the open. They were buried, not to be forgotten, but to survive long enough to be understood. A Neolithic priest carved a room that could change how a mind worked and sealed 7,000 bodies around it. A hunter-gatherer civilization raised the oldest temple on Earth, then spent decades methodically filling it in. Someone in the Peruvian Andes sealed a network of tunnels with rolling stone doors and pulled them shut from the inside. In every case, the decision was the same. Go underground. Cover it over. Wait. We are still digging. We are still only at the edges of what is down there. And the deepest chambers, the ones that have not yet been opened, are still sealed, still waiting, still holding whatever it was that someone decided the surface world was not yet ready to see. Subscribe and keep going deeper.